A lot of work going up to this
You guys look good.
1 minute.
Oh, yeah.
You look pretty, actually.
That's a word you wanted to
That's
hit.
what we
Thank
do
you.
right before we start. Okay, you guys ready? Here
I'm
we go.
gonna,
Let's go.
I'm gonna clap so I know a place to go. Okay.
Okay.
All right. We're on this one.
Yep.
Good. Yo, welcome to the Bub and Bob Show, where we are talking about faith culture in America from a Christian point of view or a Christian worldview. My guest today is an awesome guy. I met him a while back, and we've become actually pretty dear friends. He's written a lot of books, but the two I'm going to talk about is God, a Moral Monster and True for You, but Not for Me. He's also a professor, very smart guy. Love this guy. I'm glad he's here. Welcome, Paul Copan.
Thanks so much,
here.
Bub. Appreciate
Welcome to the Bub and Bob Show.
it. Yeah, this is so fun.
Yeah. So before we get into the stuff that I really want to talk about, or the books and the stuff that you're known for, I want to go back as far as we can think about, and go back to what your journey was that the Lord used to finally move you to become a believer. Do you recall that journey? Do you know? Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, I grew up in a pastor's home. My parents came from the old country, Ukraine and Latvia.
Yeah.
And
Wow.
my dad was pastoring a Russian-Ukrainian church in Cleveland, Ohio for a number of years, which is where I was born, and grew up in a family of 7 children and had a wonderful, nurturing home. And it wasn't until I came to high school, though, that I really started to see the foundations of my faith, that it wasn't just something that I inherited from my parents, but actually it was a faith that I could own for myself because it was true. So I got exposed to Christian apologetics. I started to read books about the resurrection and about the historical reliability of Scripture.
And
so
how old
on.
were you here at this point? How old were you?
I was
when
in
you
high school.
Wow.
So,
Reading those books in high school. Okay,
yeah,
great.
yeah. And then I went to college, was planning on doing some sort of ministry overseas, and just kind of worked my way forward to prepare for that. Went to Trinity Seminary.
Wow.
And, again, that high school time was very formative for me in seeing the strong foundations of the Christian faith, that I was proclaiming something that was true.
Yeah.
That wasn't just something that I grew up with and made me feel happy or something, but so much more than that. And so when I was at Trinity Seminary, I don't know if I'm running ahead here, but
No, it's good. Yeah.
But in my first semester there, I took a philosophy class, and that philosophy class with Stuart Hackett was one that really helped me get a lot of excellent answers, found out that I liked this philosophy stuff, and ended up taking on an additional major, so a Master of Divinity as well as a Master of Arts in Philosophy of Religion. And so that really helped to give me a good taste of what the life of the mind can look like, and how these tools that are available for the Christian to utilize and to help make sense of the Christian faith and how to articulate it even.
Right.
I just found that I had a great platform to speak to people because I had a philosophy background. So when I went on staff with the church in upstate New York for 6.5 years, I had campus ministries going on, and I would go to a nearby university or college and would speak to students. And the fact that I had a philosophy background, spoke to their debating society every term, and it was just a great time of engagement. And so it was that one class that led to my seeing the value of it in Christian ministry. And then my wife said, "How about getting a PhD?" And so we,
Your wife said that.
My wife,
Okay.
a wonderful woman. And
You're not smart enough yet. Go get a PhD.
That's it.
What's wrong
Yeah.
with you? Yeah.
And so I said, perfect. And so we had 4 kids at the time, and we ended up going to Wisconsin. I went to Marquette University to get my PhD in philosophy. Our 5th child was born in Wisconsin, and it was a wonderful time. And then just did other things, and a Christian apologetics, working with Ravi Zacharias International Ministries, and then going on down to Palm Beach Atlantic University in 2004, and been there ever since, teaching philosophy, ethics, Christian worldview, apologetics, that sort of thing.
So that's great. That's the broad view. I'm going to do a Genesis 1, 2, 3 thing. So I'm going to go back to the specifics now. Was there a point where you knew that you were a sinner, and there was a point where you're like, okay, I believe what people are saying about Christ. I believe at least parts of what I'm reading in the Bible. I know that there's a conviction in my heart, and where you actually surrendered. And about what age was that?
Oh, I remember I was 5 years of age, and I was thinking, I'm going to go through this whole day without doing anything wrong.
Yes.
And I was a miserable failure
Yes.
within the first hour. And, I was very well aware of sin, shortcomings, but there's just something that gave me a confidence about what Jesus had come to do, that there was something that needed to be done on my behalf. And the Christian faith made sense.
Yeah.
It just seemed to resonate with me, fit very well with the things that I was going through, the fact that I needed forgiveness, the fact that there is a God to whom I'm accountable, the fact that I can't make it on my own and need outside assistance. And so, I mean, I saw that all along the way, but it was really in high school that I came to see very strong foundations for this. It's not as though it's just a good story, which it is,
Right.
but it's, as C.S. Lewis said, this is myth became fact.
Yeah.
This was something that really encapsulates the wisdom of the ages from various traditions, but Jesus is the embodiment, the one in whom are hidden all the treasures of wisdom and knowledge. So I began seeing that.
That's your verse.
Clarity. Yeah, it is. Yeah.
That's the verse you like. So what was it like growing up at the Copan house? I mean, at 5, you're realizing that you need Christ. So obviously this was around. You said he had a wonderful upbringing. What's how many kids and how was all that whole thing like, and how did that shape your faith?
Yeah. Well, just a wonderful. You've got instant community like that,
right.
And so having being in a family of 7 kids, my grandmother was also living with us.
Okay.
We would care for her, and so it was very. My parents had been through the war in Europe, and there was so much. Really, you really see that stamp of the greatest generation upon them, and so it was a real privilege to be in a home where they had a very clear sense of right and wrong. They're of strong moral character. My parents were dedicated servants of the Lord. They weren't in it for the show. They were very much full of heart and dedication and servanthood and humility and not caring about who gets the credit. And they just were excellent role models for us. They loved us well. They've died in recent years, and so we miss them.
Yeah.
But we are so grateful for the heritage that we have, and all of my siblings just are. There's just such just an awe that we have. For our parents and how well they raised us, how well they loved us, and so we are grateful and blessed.
Are all the siblings like that now, having larger families like you do, and the same thing?
No, I mean they some have families of of their own.
Yeah.
Not all, but yeah, there's definitely even in the next generation there is an appreciation for the heritage.
Absolutely.
That they have. Of course, my wife's parents, they came from Holland. They went through the war in Holland, Nazi-occupied Holland, and so there's that stream also coming to our kids, and a great appreciation that our kids have for that heritage. So really, into the next generation, I think a great appreciation for that. And our parents have written their memoirs, and
they have.
We have. I'd like to one day write a book about this, but just stories of my mom surviving the bombing of Berlin, and being in having great aunts who were in Dresden, Germany when it was bombed, and being in Moscow during the Russian Revolution when it broke out, and my grandmother having an encounter with the Tsarina of Russia. So all sorts of fascinating stories.
Speaking of war, Bub and I both had brothers that we actually warred with. Was there one of the brothers in the family that you specifically were a favorite of?
That I was a favorite of, like a pick on.
Whatever.
We all got along well.
Really?
I did have my sister has apologized to me about this. My younger sister, she would like to instigate little squabbles with me, and so I would warn her and said, "Don't do it." But she's, it was not anything that was malicious or mean. I mean, we all really got along quite well.
Yeah, I was looking forward to having someone of a really bad character on first, so I can compare with me. But I'm like, I get Saint Paul here.
Well.
It's so here's me and my brother.
Saint and sinner Paul. Saint and sinner.
No, I know. It's okay. So here's what I did with my brother, because he was really fast and tall. I could never catch him, so I would hide D batteries in the couch. And he'd come hit me on the back of the head and think I couldn't catch him, and I'd grab the battery and throw it and hit him.
Wow.
He'd have welts on the back of his back.
Wow.
So that's your sister, and you aren't like that.
Yeah, no, it was, we were always at the positive pole,
Yes.
never at the negative
Okay,
pole.
yeah.
There,
Oh, that's
so,
a good reference. That's good.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I think mine hit square in the back. I
There
just
you
like
go.
both poles in the spline.
There you go.
Yeah. So ananyway, we're not going to get
Highly charged
Yeah,
relationships.
thank
there.
you. Well done. We're not gonna get
You said spline. Did you say spline,
I said
guys?
spline. It's a combination
Cut.
between the spine and the spleen. You
Cut.
didn't know this? Bob should be off camera and silent as
Yes.
often as
All right.
possible.
Go ahead, keep going.
No, so okay. So I'm going to switch over quick to. I want to play a skeptic with you, and kind of get into your book. Is God a moral monster? And these things have been posed to me. They're when I was growing up, I never heard this stuff. Never heard all the things that the new atheists bring out, and all the people when all of a sudden we got our phones and smartphones and social media, and everyone's just throwing stuff out because they can be anonymous. They don't have to face anyone. So all these there might not be newer questions, but they're more popular now. So the big one is why does it seem that God is so grumpy in the Old Testament, and then all of a sudden he's full of life and grace and love in the New Testament? How do we reconcile that God? I mean, I think they're the same, obviously, but I mean, from your point of view and your studies, what?
Yeah. Well, I think it's useful to go to the New Testament and see how the New Testament views the God of the Old Testament, especially in Jesus. And Jesus is actually one who isn't shrinking from identifying with that God, in fact, being the revealer of that God, being God himself. In fact, it's interesting that in, for example, Jude 5, the best manuscripts have mentioned that using the word Jesus, that after the Israelites were delivered from Egypt, Jesus destroyed them because of their disobedience.
Yes.
So here the New Testament, this Christocentric view, putting Jesus into the fray of the Old Testament, also includes him in this. And I think it's a reminder. And of course, there's judgment. Jesus is one who talks about God's commandments in the Old Testament that involved capital punishment, Matthew chapter 15. Or Jesus saying that this false teacher Jezebel in Revelation 2, that he is going to cast her on a bed of sickness and he is going to strike her followers dead.
Yes.
Again, this is a temporal judgment, and so we see that some of the things that are part of the Old Testament, we have 1,400 or so years here, 1,500 years of what people will say. Look, God is angry, jealous, judging, and so forth. Well, we only have 40, 50 years in the New Testament, but yet we have these affirmations of what this God did in the Old Testament, and also Jesus identifying with that God. And we see those sorts of things going on in the New Testament: Ananias and Sapphira being struck dead, or Elymas being struck blind, and so forth, and Jesus threatening judgments in Revelation 2 and 3, and so forth. So Paul says in Romans 11:22, he says, "Behold the kindness and severity of God." And we see both kindness and severity. In fact, as we look at the Old Testament, we see that God is dealing with a bunch of people who are, he delivers them. They complain and rebel. He makes a covenant with them. They forsake it and sell it, and they have this fatted, the worshiping the golden calf and so forth. That routinely they're quickly abandoning.
And he's patient with them over that time. It's not like they do it immediately and then he crushes them or strikes them down. It's years.
Exactly. So God is being very patient. I mean, when the term jealousy comes up, it's because these people are breaking the covenant that God has made with them. It's sort of like God being a wounded husband after his wife is running off after other men.
A righteous jealousy. You should be. You should be jealous because it's
a jealousy that comes not from immaturity, but a jealousy that comes from pain.
Yeah, and perfection, right? He's also perfect. So
and so we see those sorts of emotions that are there, and God is dealing with the people who are, it's kind of a messy situation on the ground. God doesn't wait until these people are morally mature, like all of us are in the 21st century, and He works with what He has on the ground. He works with people who are involved in all sorts of fallen, messy social and moral structures, and just think, how would I bring, say, democracy to a place like Saudi Arabia?
Right.
Well, try to apply that maybe to the Old Testament,
Yeah.
and you'll get some sort of an idea.
Yeah.
That this is something that you can't legislate an ideal utopian society into existence. God begins with a lot of messiness, works with them, but prepares a context for the coming of Jesus, the Messiah, bringing salvation to all. That God's beginning with Israel in a particular way has a universal intent, that God seeks to bring blessing to the ends of the earth, beginning with Abraham through the nation of Israel. And despite all of its rebellion and so forth, God is still patiently sticking with them, and through them the Messiah, Jesus of Nazareth, the seed of Abraham, comes in order to bring this redemption that extends to the ends of the earth. So there's God who steps into our mess. God steps into a mess in the Old Testament. God steps into a mess in the New Testament in Jesus, and again allows himself to go through the anguish of suffering, death, injustice. He faces it squarely. He gives his life for his enemies. That this is the God who is speaking in the Old Testament, but now reveals himself in a very clear, concrete way in Jesus of Nazareth. And when you're looking at how low God is willing to go for our salvation, look at the cross of Jesus Christ.
Amen. Yeah. Yeah. What do you think is behind that stuff? I mean, you think that's a legitimate question, or are people throwing this stuff out as smoke screens? What have you found when you're discussing this with people to be? Is it?
Well, you'll probably have a range of views. For some, it may be smoke screens. For others, it's an honest questioning. It's not as though these are just easy questions, and if you only saw it from my angle, then all the problems would go away. I mean, they're tough questions, no doubt about it. And I don't want to rule out. It's important for us to engage in this honest questioning and asking too. What is the best way of approaching these texts? I think some people are quick to dismiss them,
Right.
quick to say, oh, that wasn't God who actually commanded those things. It wasn't God who actually did those things. That was just the ancient author who said, thus says the Lord, when it wasn't thus says the Lord. Is just the thus says me and my fallen ancient Near Eastern violent worldview.
Yeah.
And I think we run into a lot of problems there because we, again, see in the New Testament these sorts of things reinforced. Jesus himself brings destruction. And so, but I think it shows that there is a God who takes sin seriously. I think we probably don't see, we obviously don't see the full picture here of a God who is wrathful towards sin and sees things like he saw how dangerous Israel's situation was, how quickly compromised Israel was in idolatry and really losing its sense of mission and also preparation for the coming of the Messiah. Here, in a sense, the global mission to the world, the salvation of the world is at stake. And Israel is repeatedly compromising that position of privilege and opportunity because of its idolatry. So here we have a nation that God is working patiently with, but there's a lot at stake going on here. And I think a lot of us, like the critics, will sometimes dismiss those sorts of things as though, oh, this God is just getting cranky and so I think that's just an unfair, uncharitable representation of what is going on here. That God knew that this newly found faith of Israel, newly budded faith, that it was a very tender plant that needed to be preserved, and there are a lot of things that threatened the identity and mission of Israel.
Yeah. You think a lot of people, I mean, maybe is this a church issue, or is it a modern church issue that we tend to find? We've even kind of renamed sin as brokenness or unhappiness or something. And it seems that if we were to look at all of Scripture, you would understand from the beginning that God is gracious and merciful, but he's also just and holy, right? And that's ultimately through the thread of the whole Bible.
Oh, absolutely. I think that, and I think it is helpful, though, and I think some of the critics who are trying to see the God of love in the New Testament as being clearly manifested in Jesus, I think they're right to emphasize the greater priority of God's love. But I think we need to see that God's wrath is an expression of God's love,
That's good.
rather
That's good.
than as something that is pitted against it
Yeah.
or opposed to it.
Or as if he has emotions like us and he gets mad and throws off the finger.
Exactly. Yeah.
It's-
And so think of a a parent getting mad when a child is experimenting with drugs, or
Right.
when someone's trying to sell drugs to his kid. There's an appropriate outrage, anger that flows from a spirit of love,
Yes.
and indeed the jealousy that God exhibits when the Israelites are compromising on their covenant with God. That God's jealousy comes from pain. God's jealousy comes from that heart of love that seeks to have his people rightly related to him. So I think we do need to emphasize, and I think it's often overlooked, that in the Old Testament we see great expressions of God's love, dedication, patience, and so forth. But we also see that in the New Testament, love is intensified,
Yes.
but wrath is also intensified, like the book of Hebrews and Hebrews 2
Yeah.
and 10 and 12. If this transgression of the law received its just punishment, how much greater will the consequence be? How much more severe will
Yeah.
it be for those who reject the gospel of Jesus Christ,
Yeah.
for those who turn and trample him underfoot and so forth? So there's a greater severity that is also highlighted.
Well said.
So we can't simply say there's less wrath in the New Testament, more love. No, both of them are intensified.
Right. No, that's good stuff. So let's move. I got another question for you. Another one that's like popular out there about the whole slavery thing, right? I mean, it's been heightened, obviously, in this political climate with racism and everything. Is how in the world can I even serve a God? How can I even be a conservative in any definition of the word if God Himself condoned slavery? And now we're trying to, move all these monuments out and go and putting it all in one category. Did God condone slavery like we know it?
Yeah, this is a big misunderstanding,
Right.
misrepresentation that a lot of our modern translations have terms slavery, slave, etc. And interestingly, the King James Version from 1611 only had one reference in the Old Testament to the term, slave.
Right.
And it's actually not even in the Hebrew text. It's actually inserted for smoothness of translation. And now we've got, after colonialism, after Jim Crow laws, after a civil war and so forth, I mean, all of these things, we use that term slavery all the more in the
Right.
Bible, and problematically, it communicates language of antebellum slavery, that we've got, that what we read in the Bible is comparable to what was going on in the South. And this is, again, a terrible misunderstanding. And one of the things that I'm repeating is that if the Southerners who had slaves were following the law of Moses, actually slavery wouldn't have been an issue. You'd have been, anybody involved in kidnapping, capital punishment. That
Which is the whole
anyone
thing was based on.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. Or if a slave ran away, Israel was to make provision for a runaway slave in any of its
Asylum,
cities. So there's asylum here, unlike the fugitive slave laws in the around the Civil War era. You also have provisions that are made. People get into slavery, well, sometimes because there's war. There's the war conditions, and those who have no place to go after war, they're not killed, but they're doing various menial service and so forth, hewing wood and carrying buckets of water and so forth. So you do have that kind of a thing, but and so you can have foreigners who are working for you because of that sort of a condition. But within Israel, you have these provisions for people who are impoverished. That that you have gleaning laws where people who are poor can take can pluck fruit from trees or the edges of a field that haven't been totally mown down. You have these sorts of provisions for the people of Israel, that there is a concern for those who are, the threefold vulnerable people. The alien, the widow, and the orphan. That those who are the most vulnerable were to be looked after. Why? Because you were slaves, servants. Again, that's more like slavery in the land of Egypt, and so they're to remember the servitude and therefore be kind to those who are foreigners in their midst. So there's a great concern to love the alien who is also to be under the same law, and the alien who is working in Israel. Yes, you could acquire servants to work for you. Again, it wasn't something dehumanizing. They were part of the family,
Right.
keep in mind. And also, if there is a foreigner, again, he can actually, who is working for you, he can actually reach status where he can accumulate or acquire, same word used,
Right.
acquire an Israelite
Right.
to work for him.
Yep.
Again, it's not as though this is somehow chattel slavery. The Israelite can be acquired to work for him. That's the same language as is used of God
Right.
acquiring Israel at the Exodus 15. So God is acquiring the people there. It's a legal transaction, but it's not as though this is demeaning to the person. It's sort of like a team, a basketball team having an owner,
Right.
having players who are traded and so forth. We have that sort of legal
Right.
language, but we don't think, oh, this is dehumanizing or anything like that. So again, this is the kind of picture that we need to, I think, better understand, that we actually have a very humanizing process, a preservation of the rights and dignity of those who are servants within Israel. And the term servant itself, Eved, is a neutral term. It can be positive, like Joshua and Moses are called, an Eved Adonai, a servant of the Lord. So it's not an inherently negative term, but a lot of people,
We've made it that
the way
way,
we
right?
have turned it
Yeah.
into that, exactly. And so to be a servant, well, just what's the context? The Israelites had once been slaves,
Right.
servants in the land of Egypt, and God says, let my people go that they may serve me or be my servants in the wilderness.
Yes.
So you move from one negative state of servitude to a positive state of
We're all
servitude.
serving someone, right? It's the
exactly.
Bob Dylan thing, right?
You gotta serve
You
somebody.
got to serve
Exactly.
somebody, right? And obviously serving a just and holy and good God is far different than what we're thinking of when we think of Southern slavery or chattel slavery. And and which is a gross misunderstanding. Which it's when you describe those three things, it's the complete opposite. I mean, all this is really actually a blessing. It's sometimes to even save families and to care for families, and people would have been dead without the caring of them, and they bring them in. And then sometimes there was debt, right? Someone owed debt to the person, so
exactly.
they worked for them, and then they
Right.
worked it out, and then they were free if they chose to be free.
It was an indentured servitude,
Right.
and so you worked, the basically for 6 years, and you would be freed after that.
Right.
So you, sort of like people who paid passage to come to the New World. They didn't have money. They basically worked for 7 years,
Yeah.
and then they were free and operated like any other citizen would with their newly acquired status. But it wasn't because they're somehow diminished in their person. They just had a certain debt to pay, and once they paid it, then they were free to go about things. So, and they couldn't keep them beyond that.
Right.
And in fact, even if you injured your servant, you gouged out his eye or knocked out his tooth. Another spin on indentured
Yes.
servitude.
Yeah, there.
But
There you go.
But you have this reminder that the injuries can actually free you from any kind of debt, and you'd be released because you've been injured by your employer, the person who has taken you in. And of course, the servants themselves, as they were typically part of the family within their tribal territories and clans and so on. But if you worked for someone for these 6 years, then you had food, clothing, shelter, housing, all provided for you.
Yep.
And so it was actually a very even secure, stable environment.
Right.
John Goldengate, Old Testament scholar, says it's actually not a bad arrangement
Right.
to be involved as a servant who is part of the household and has this kind of security and doesn't have to worry about all of those things that the person who's actually running the household has to worry about.
No, it's pretty. That's good stuff. Okay, the last one when it comes to this book, and one of the ones that actually makes me the maddest, but I'm going to calm myself down and hear a reasonable, winsome answer from you. It's this whole idea of God being a child abuser when He put His own Son on a cross to die for us. And we go back to Abraham and Isaac even, and how could He want him to sacrifice this son and only at the last minute grab him when the angel was about to stab him? And that just doesn't gel with the God that loves to some people, right? Is that how can you do this? How can you abuse your own child?
Yeah.
How do you answer that?
Well, not some people say, well, your child at a bedtime story is asking, Daddy, would you do this to me if God told you? And so forth.
Right,
so
right. So you have a child this way. Yeah.
So let's personalize it even a little bit more here. What we have in, say, the story of Abraham, we'll go to the crucifixion, death of Jesus in a moment. But what we have here is a very unusual set of circumstances where God has already been talking to Abraham. God has been engaging with Abraham throughout Genesis 12 through 21. There's been a lot of lead up to this point. God is, Abraham is God's friend.
Right.
And so there is this deep relationship that is there. And God has made a promise to Abraham that he's going to bring blessing to the nations through whom? Well, it's going to be Isaac. God has promised that this child is going to be the means of blessing to the nations. Well, when God is providing for Abraham earlier on, he says he's going to take him to a land where he's going to show him. Abraham takes matters into his own hands. But even so, he sends Ishmael away. Kind of test number one. Sends Ishmael away, but God says, I'm going to make of him a great nation. So even though there's tension in the household, in the tent hold, that things are tense.
Yes.
That you send out Hagar and Ishmael, they will not die in the wilderness because I'm going to make of Ishmael a great nation. So he gets up early in the morning, saddles the donkey, and so the same language that's used in the next chapter, where he does so with Isaac. But with Isaac, he is already, again, he's been assured that there's going to be a great nation that comes from, in fact, blessing to all the nations through Isaac. Abraham is confident that God is going to do something, even though it sounds horrific. And keep in mind, too, that Abraham didn't know about God's view on infant sacrifice, child sacrifice. So this is something that was part of the practice. And God...
Was that going on in the culture around them?
Oh, it was going on around them, and so we have this sort of a practice that is taking place, and so Abraham, who is getting to know who this God is instructed in this way, but he knows that even if there is a sacrifice, he says, we will come back and we will worship.
Yeah,
we'll worship and we'll return.
Somehow he's going to do something. Yeah,
so he knows he's going to come back with Isaac. Just doesn't know how it's going to happen. So keep in mind that there's a narrative here, that there's a history, and Abraham is confident that God is going to deliver, God is going to come through. And even in the command that God issues, there's a number of commentators note that there's a certain tenderness. Come, please, and offer. So there's this, that there is almost an understanding of what may be involved here, that there's this attachment, but God is going to deliver. God is going to bring him through. And that's why the author of Hebrews comments that Abraham reckoned that God is able to raise even the dead.
Right.
So it's not as though some father is told in the middle of the night, kill your son.
Right.
There's been a long history here of engagement, and that this has been a miracle child that God has provided.
Right.
So the context is completely different. It's unusual. There's a particular circumstance here that, yes, all things being equal, you don't do that, but there is some sort of a weight of historical engagement, narrative, friendship, trust, and so forth.
Yeah, well, faith.
That takes place, exactly.
The true definition of faith is trust, and from a relationship, and he has evidence of it from his whole history. And he's like, well, if this is what the Lord says to do, I'm going to do it. Do you think, because when you put it in context a little bit, do you think that God was testing Abraham's faith because the other cultures were willing to kill their own kids for a false God? Do you think that had anything to do with it, or is it more in the line of what he was just trying to show through Christ?
Yeah, well, I think that there is definitely something to be said for Abraham learning that whatever sacrifices you will have to make, I will not require you to do that of your children. And so here he is stopping him short, saying this is not going to happen.
No.
And then from that point on, this becomes a model for God's people to say, no, this isn't going to happen. Now, when it comes to the New Testament, Jesus is one who lays down his life. It's not as though you have a lot of people view this as being three parties. You have God who's angry with sin, the world that's sinful, and loving Jesus who throws himself in between in order to
all
to
separate
save.
entities, not kind of
And so I say no. I mean, God the Father, God the Son, God the Holy Spirit are all they love the world, but they're also wrathful against sin. And so it is not a three-party view here, but a two-party, God and humanity. And so God is the one who loves the world, but also God provides for redemption for the world. And Jesus voluntarily gives his life. He says, no one takes my life. I lay it down of my own accord and take it back up again. So yes, the Father is involved in giving his Son, but the Son gives his life as well. This is something that has been a divine arrangement from eternity,
Right.
that God has been one who has been planning this redemption, and that it is not something in which Father and Son are pitted against each other, but this is something that is done whereby the Son gives himself willingly and also satisfactorily, that what he does in giving himself is sufficient to pay the debt that we owe to God, but ourselves, we cannot pay it. And we have analogies in this. It's not as though some people say, oh, that's unjust. How could the just die for the unjust?
Right.
Well, we have insurance policies, like parents have kids on their policy, and if the child does, a teenage driver messes up the car, well, who ends up paying? Well, the parents
Yes.
do, or a broken window or something like that, or even a CEO of a company. There's been mismanagement of funds and the CEO doesn't know about it. Well, he says, I take full responsibility for this, and he makes sure that all the debts are paid back and so forth. Or a company subsumes a smaller company that's struggling and pays off all of its debts and so forth, and then brings it into its own company, so it'll be much better off,
right.
and so forth. Is that that
Shouldn't do that
shouldn't have
'cause
done
he's
that.
just-
That's
Yeah.
you didn't get your just desserts. Well, hey, if there's a handout, I'm going to take it. If there could be a way in which
Right.
this can be rescued, then great. So God is not doing anything unjust or going against these laws of justice within his own character. No, God is actually not simply forgiving, but God takes justice into account, and so we see in the cross both love and justice coming together.
Yeah, I love that. Okay, let's switch over to your other book. So I have two books that I have like a handful. I don't have a shelf anymore. It's all on my iPad. I have like 40 books that are always on my, like I reference them all the time. And this is one of those. True for you, not for me. I love that book, by the way. It's got more monsters up there too. But I always go back to the truth thing, because there's so much stuff going on in society around us that, with Oprah saying, your truth and my truth, and everybody saying you have your truth, and we don't understand the difference between preferences and truth. Why did you write this book when you wrote it? What was going on in your head? What did you see that I got to write this?
Yeah, back in the 90s. And even while I was in graduate school getting my master's degree, I talked to people who were relativists, and they would just say this sort of thing. Well, that's just true for you, or that's just your standard, or morality is just cultural, and
Right.
so forth. And this got me doing a little bit of digging on my own, and realizing that, boy, a lot of these arguments are pretty weak and self-contradictory and so forth. And so I just, as I'm known, I'm like the handout king. So I was teaching a Sunday school class, and I just put material together, researched and so forth, and that preliminary research turned into that book, True for You but Not for Me, which came out in the first edition in '98, while I was had been working at Marquette University for my PhD. But I just saw that pluralism, relativism, both with regard to truth and morality, that these were regularly under assault, that more and more through postmodern influences were buying into this, that there really is no moral standard, that truth is just a matter of perspective, and so forth. And so I just started to put together some material that would be a resource to folks who are encountering these sorts of arguments, or who are you to judge others, or that's just your perspective, or it's arrogant for you to say that somebody else is wrong, etc. So I just tried to organize a book that dealt with these kinds of slogans, and I began with kind of the general view of truth and reality, working my way up to dealing with moral truth, objective moral values, and then moving into the question of religious pluralism. What about all these other religions? Is one religion true for one person but not for another, or are all religions pathways to salvation or liberation? And then, obviously, leading into from that would be, well, if there are many religions, well, why is Jesus unique? Why should we pay attention to him? And then from there, well, if Jesus is the unique revelation of God, then what about those who never heard of him? So those are my five
Right.
portions of the
Right.
book
Right.
in which I unpack those. And again, each part of that book has different slogans or this, kind of questions, quips that people give, and so I try to work through them and offer a look at the assumptions behind those questions and how we can creatively address them.
So, what do you say to a relativist who actually claims that? So, no. I mean, because you see it a lot. I think you can even switch it over into the gender identity kind of thing. You can be anything you want.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't have to. Nothing has to comport with reality. And so, I'm not only a skeptic, but it's a relative, baby. But it is what it is.
Yeah, Roger Scruton, the philosopher, said that when a relativist tells you that everything is relative, he's basically asking you not to believe what he says. So don't. So he's basically saying, in other words, there's no reason that I should take your viewpoint seriously because it's just tantamount to opinion, tantamount to preference, and nothing beyond that. If you're saying this is true and you ought to believe it, you're not a relativist
You're not
anymore.
a relativist, yeah.
So,
something's true.
Yeah. And you believe that if a person disagrees with you, then that person would be in error.
Right.
So again,
you can't even live. You can't even. There's no way to even live in the world because we all discriminate, rightly or wrongly. We all have thoughts that we think are right. Mm-hmm. Everyone thinks that they're saying something. That's
Why
right.
do we believe anything at all? Because we believe those things are true.
Yeah.
We wouldn't believe them otherwise. And so we, and again, when it comes to engaging with people who are relativists, I think it's helpful to remember that people who are relativists are going to be selective relativists. Sure. They pick and choose, usually about God and morality.
Right. Always
those are the two areas.
Right. Those are the ones.
But they're not going to disagree with you about. They're not going to say
that's a baseball. It's on the ground.
The Chicago Bears.
Yeah.
They won for you, but the Green Bay Packers won for me.
For me. Right.
And they are not going to be relativists about who won the World Cup.
Yeah.
They're not going to be relativists about what is written on a prescription bottle.
So whatever they consider
that's true
a
for the
fact.
pharmacist, but not for me.
Right.
And so,
it's true for the cop that pulls me over that I got a ticket, but not for me, so I don't have to pay it. Right.
Yeah,
it's like,
exactly. We find ourselves bumping up against reality over and over again, and this should be a cue that we're actually not the ones who manipulate reality. That reality hits us squarely in the face very often. And so I think it's wise to remember that relativists themselves are actually strong absolutists. They hold to things like the absolute of tolerance, the wrongness or the absolute of not judging or judging. And so they will say, and they'll often tack on. They'll say you can do whatever you want. But they always tack on an absolute, just as long as you don't hurt anyone, just as long as it's between two consenting adults.
Yeah.
Why? Why add that?
You just made that
if you're a relativist, just leave that latter part off.
Well, you couldn't even say a statement if you're a relativist, it seems. Like it would all come back and it's self-defeating, it falls apart. And
it's like if you say that there's no such thing as truth, you're basically saying that it's true, that there is no truth.
Exactly.
And so it ends up being a self-refuting, self-undermining position. And I think it's a reminder to us that people are not relativists because they really intellectually thought this through.
Right.
It really is a matter of preference. I think a lot of people
have
been disappointed.
There's emotions behind it, right?
By, I think... you can
whatever
test this,
yeah.
But people have probably been disappointed by authorities. They've been let down, and so to trust someone who takes an authoritative position, well, they say, kind of like the the garden party song. You can't please everyone, so you may as well just please yourself.
Right.
And so I think people have that sort of a mindset. That, why should I trust anyone? Why should I believe anyone? Why should I, take that person as an authority because these authorities have let me down? And I think that that's one avenue where we have an opportunity relationally to connect with the relativist, where that person needs to be helped to move from distrust to trust through relationship, that this is critical because I think so often they've been disappointed in relationship. And so, but again, if you want to, the relativist is really poorly positioned to be in a place where you enter into a marriage, a friendship of some sort. I mean, why would you
Right.
trust anyone who's a relativist?
Right.
I mean, this is just a terrible setup
Yes.
for life.
Yes.
Why would you want to hire a relativist
Yeah.
in your workplace?
Yeah.
So again, it is very self-defeating, not just intellectually, but also from a very practical point of view.
Right.
You really harm yourself by being a relativist, because it fundamentally dehumanizes you. It makes you a hollow person. You can't, if there's no standard toward which you strive, well, why try to work on your character?
Yeah.
Why try to become a more
better
upright
husband or
person?
anything.
Yeah, exactly. So why should I try to strengthen relationships? And I remember speaking at a conference, and a guy came up to me afterwards, and he said that he had been a relativist, and his girlfriend, because he had been so selfish, and everything revolved around him, she broke up with him because she couldn't commit to someone who never made commitments as a relativist. And that really woke him up. He really liked this girl, and realized that truth mattered, that character mattered, that objective moral standards mattered. And eventually that led him to find Christ. And he reconnected with this girl later on, and she saw the change that had taken place in his life, ended up marrying the guy. She became a believer. They got married.
Good for her. She stood strong.
Exactly right.
That's good.
So again, it was a wonderful story to hear.
So when you've talked to people about this subject, and I know it's hard in a debate or when you're one-on-one with someone, because there's a lot of emotions in there, right? And it takes a while for someone to go back and really think through it. Have you ever been like across the table here or at a class when you're teaching where the light went off, where they're like, of course, that was dumb for the last 2 years. Thank you, Paul, because I was like,
sometimes people will realize, oh yeah, that is dumb.
Can't be right.
This is silly. Other times, I think it may just be where they want to hold their ground, try to put up in a sense, a disagreement and defend their position. But I'll say, I think I remember talking to one guy named Basil, and I was on a plane with him, and I said, I was speaking plainly with him.
Yes, you were.
And he was giving me these relativistic lines. I said, now Basil, let me ask you a question. I said, think before you answer this, because I think the way that you've been talking, I suspect that if you answer this question along the lines of the way that you've been already responding to me, you're basically going to you're just going to contradict yourself. Mm-hmm. So just think about what you're going to say here, because you're basically, I think you're probably going to say, don't believe what I'm telling you. I think that's what you're going to ultimately end up saying.
Right.
And so he kind of hesitated, paused, and I kind of see what you're saying here, and he conceded that there is something to the point that I'm making, and I need to think this through. Or they might say, okay, you've got a point about relativism being self-contradictory. What if you can say, okay, maybe there is one thing that is absolutely true. Maybe it's the view or the truth that everything is relative except that statement.
Yes.
I said, well, I think we've already secured a victory here by admitting that there is one absolute truth, and if there's one absolute truth, then maybe there could be others. In fact, you're using logic.
Yep.
Logical laws exist. You believe that those are binding.
Yep.
So you take those to be absolute in doing the reasoning that you're doing to draw that conclusion. Yep. I said, so maybe there are even more. so I said, why restrict yourself to simply that? So I've had those sorts of conversations.
Yeah, well, that's interesting.
Playing with the basil.
With the basil.
Sounds like
you get his little thing.
Spicy conversation with the basil.
Very spicy and plain conversation, right? That's where we went. What scares you about today, about society, America today, if anything?
Mm-hmm.
What concerns you? Maybe you're not scared, but maybe hey, this is getting weird.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think some of the things that just people denying what is real, and not really being concerned. I think even in the media, seeing these things, that truth does not seem to be valued. It seems to be political. It seems to be agenda driven very often. And it doesn't matter if the facts stand against a particular position. What really matters is that your agenda wins. And again, this is not objective journalism.
No.
This is really, seriously problematic partisan journalism. And so, I mean, I think that's just a manifestation of some of these things that are part of this relativistic stream of thinking. Basically, once you get rid of truth, well, all that you're left with is power. And if you can just bludgeon someone, regardless of commitment, to the truth, that's really, that's the kind of victory to pursue. If you can't beat them on the truth,
It's a whole new form
level.
of bullying in a way,
It is,
isn't it? Right?
Absolutely. And I think too, we're seeing. I mean, fundamentally, we're seeing a continuation of spiritual warfare.
Right,
Yeah, I
for
think
sure.
that we need to remember that we're not wrestling against flesh and blood and so forth, that we are up against hostility that goes beyond rational
Yeah.
proportions, where people are being singled. You think of the persecution of the church around the world, and how
Still, I mean-
there's such a silence when it comes to the media. People aren't reporting it. If some other minority is being persecuted, then they'll bring that out. But it seems like the Christians are being singled out for attack. I'm not saying that there aren't other minorities,
Sure.
Baha'is or the like in other parts of the world. I understand that, but for the most part, we're seeing a very strong stance against the Christian faith, and a lot of the things that ought to be looked at more carefully are being, again, there's no attention paid to those sorts of things. Like, how are women being treated in the Muslim world?
Right.
Ayan Hirsi
Right.
Ali, her book Infidel, and she's talked about these sorts of things,
Absolutely.
and is a voice crying in the wilderness when it comes to we're the feminists who are going to
Yeah.
rise up and stand up for these women in other countries.
Or is the tolerance people, that are like fighting the fight, that really is going on. I mean, this is horrendous stuff that's happening.
Yeah, in comparison, I mean, Christians are allies when it comes
Yes.
to defending women and the equality of
Yep.
women and so forth. I mean, you just don't see it's so utterly disproportionate, the critique here in the United States compared to what's going on in other parts of the world. So again, there are many things that we could say about the church too. I think very often the church is because we talk, the Canaanites and so forth in the
Right,
Old Testament. Well,
right.
I think there's a lot of Canaan coming into the church, and we're seeing a lot of moral compromise. I think a lot of celebrityism within the church, and people being put onto a high pedestal, not being held accountable, and I think people not being well grounded. I think we've recently seen how people are
A lot of people
bailing
just-
on the
yeah,
faith,
yeah.
and you look at some of the reasons that they're giving, and you think, well, where was the training to help them with these sorts of things? Why, some of this stuff
funny to
seems
me
so
that
basic.
It is, but it seems it all seems very, very emotional, right? They never leave and go, well, it's because I looked in and proved that Jesus didn't rise from the dead.
Right.
It's always an emotional thing, usually a sexual thing, or hey, you know what?
Or just didn't work for me.
It didn't
or
work for
something,
me,
yeah.
and I'm out. And even though I was spent 20 years talking this way, I apologize now for what I was. But I mean, there's going to be a falling away anyway. We're headed that way. I'm not surprised when these things are happening. I'm saddened.
And I mean, we talk about the anti-intellectualism within the church, and people who are, I think, all the more vulnerable to false teachings, and I think being on guard against the temptations of culture and succumbing to a technological media age, which I think can distract us from true discipleship.
Absolutely, I think that's a big one. One day we'll talk about that when you come back on the show.
All right.
Now I want to end with this little thing that I'm going to throw out. You got a minute, and you're on an elevator, and the elevator's going down, and there's a group of 10 people in there. What's your message? What's a Paul Copan message to them as the elevator's about to go off the rails and slide down?
Yeah. Well, that I think of this in relation to the problem of evil, that if you're dealing with the worst kind of issues that people throw at you, it's usually the problem of evil. And I'd say, give me Jesus any day in light of any problem of evil issue that comes up. This is the one kind of the major argument that people launch against the Christian faith. I'd say, if Jesus isn't the solution, then we're totally finished. It's sort of like what Peter said, Lord, to whom else shall we go? You alone have the words of eternal life. Where else are you going to find the robust response to the problem of evil in which God patiently works with fallen humanity, steps into this world, getting his feet dirty and hands bloody, facing injustice, suffering, cruelty, dying in weakness at the hands of his enemies, giving himself for a broken world. I mean, what kind of a God is this that lays down his life
How can
for
you not
humanity?
at least like that God?
Yeah.
How could you hate a God that wanted to do that for you,
Yeah.
even if you,
And then that this God is guaranteeing that everything is going to be made right,
Right.
in the end. That
So he is dealing with evil.
Yeah,
he ultimately
is,
deals
yeah.
with it.
But if you take only a this world
Right.
view, a one world model, rather than a two world model, that there will be justice done, that God is going to make sure that everything is going to be set right. Cosmic justice will be done. I mean, what's atheists?
What's their solution?
Hitler and Mother
Yeah.
Teresa have the same, end. Justice is not done. Reward is not given. In a world in which God exists, in which God has given Himself through Jesus Christ, He's going to set things right. He's
It
going
is
to wipe
rectified.
tears from
It
the
is
eyes.
redeemed. Yes.
He is going to bring justice. He's going to bring happiness and self-sacrifice together in the final state. So God is going to set things right in the end. But again, you're left with just a big mess if you have some sort of a, say, naturalistic or atheistic alternative.
Christ seems to be the best answer across the board.
Yeah, so
it was awesome having you here.
Hey, thanks so much.
Thanks
Appreciate
so
it. Great
much.
to be
It's
with
great. Hey, we'll see you guys next time on the Bub and Bob Show. Adios.
Thanks, Bob.
you. Thank you.